Believe it or not, it's been just over 6 weeks since President Trump returned to the White House. In that short time, we've seen sweeping executive orders, major policy rollbacks, and escalating battles with Congress and the courts. For Democrats, the challenge is clear. How can they most effectively push back, protect their priorities, and prepare for the next election? House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is here to talk about where his party stands now and how it can best position itself for the future. Leader Jeffries, I'd love to start out by having people learn a little bit more about your background. What drew you to politics? I know you grew up in Brooklyn. You're the son of a social worker and a substance abuse counselor. So, how did that experience shape your desire to have a career in public service?
Well, great to be with you, Katie. You know, I was born, of course, in Brooklyn Hospital, raised in a working class neighborhood by my two parents, both of them, of course, public servants, public employees, helping people day to day, week to week, month after month during their decades-long careers. Grew up in the Cornerstone Baptist Church, which was always a center of activity in the community. And of course, came of age during a very challenging time for New York City and for the country in the midst of the crack cocaine epidemic that hit communities like mine very hard in the mid to late 80s into the early 90s. And all of that, I think, was a backdrop really for me. Once I went to college and then graduated and pursued a degree in public policy and eventually thereafter went to law school, I wanted to use my law degree to help the people. Wasn't exactly sure what forum that would take immediately, but I knew what ultimately drove me, what I felt compelled to do professionally was to find a way to help the people back at home in the communities that had given so much to me.
You have been described as a bridge builder, someone who balances sort of traditional democratic values with practical deal making. How would you describe your political point of view and your political style?
I'm a common sense Democrat because, you know, at the end of the day, I think what the American people want is for us in the Congress to solve problems on their behalf. And there's a lot of them that are going on, particularly as it relates to working class Americans and middle class Americans, everyone who rightly aspires to be part of the middle class, and the people who are living day to day, week to week, check to check, and in so many ways, struggling to get by and certainly can't get ahead. And we've got to change that for the American people. And that means getting things done, finding common ground whenever and wherever possible, but holding your ground and standing your ground whenever necessary.
How do you do that when compromise has become really a dirty word, when moderates are being drowned out by the extreme factions of their party? I've covered politics for a long time, Hakeem, probably before you were born, maybe. And it seems to me that the kind of deal making and the kind of compromise and the kind of meeting of the minds in the middle just doesn't happen anymore. How frustrating is that for you?
Well, there's definitely still opportunity to get things done, but we are in an era of tremendous polarization. And that's gotten worse since January 20th because we have a president who far too often is just unleashing extreme things and outrageous things on the American people, as opposed to actually focusing on solving the problems that the American people would like us to address. I mean, the main thing that Donald Trump talked about last year on the campaign trail was his repeated promise to drive down the high cost of living. And we agree that costs are too high in the United States of America. Housing costs are too high, grocery costs are too high, childcare costs are too high, insurance costs are too high, and utility costs are too high. America's too expensive. And as Democrats, we are ready, willing, and able to solve that problem to make life better for the American people. We just don't have partners right now in Washington, D.C., because
Well,
instead of
sorry, with all due respect, Akeem, it's not like Joe Biden was really on top of that, as grocery prices went higher, as gas prices, housing prices increased, and Americans all over this country were saying, help, this is really a huge struggle for us. The Biden administration, I don't want to say they remained silent, but they didn't seem proactive in addressing some of these deep pocketbook issues. So, why do you think Americans would believe the Democrats can really do anything about that?
well, we definitely all have to do better. So let me be
Well,
very
would
clear
you
about that.
concede, sorry, would you concede that Joe Biden didn't do enough with these rising prices?
I think the Congress and all of us need to do better. And here's the thing, Katie, what I will say is that this is a decades-long problem. Like the erosion of the American middle class didn't start under the presidency of Joe Biden. It's been going on for a long period of time, and it has to be reversed. And we all have to do a better job of making clear that it needs to be reversed with the fierce urgency of now. Because when the greatest generation came back in the aftermath of World War II, they built the greatest middle class in the history of the world. And the fundamental promise of America is that every successive generation, your children and your grandchildren, should be set up to have better success, working hard, playing by the rules, than their parents or their grandparents. But we're in a moment right now where a lot of people are questioning whether that remains the case. And so there were some steps that were taken by the Biden administration, particularly on healthcare costs, that did lower healthcare costs and drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. But this is an overwhelming challenge. And we need to actually agree that building America's middle class, redeeming the great American dream shouldn't be an ideological issue, not a Democratic issue, a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And we're all in for it at this moment.
I'm just curious. I mean, is there only so much Democrats or Republicans can actually do when it comes to addressing inflation? My mom used to say, the president doesn't make the economy makes the president. I mean, aren't the hands of politicians somewhat tied when it comes to things like food prices and gas prices?
Well, there definitely are challenges with respect to grocery costs, notwithstanding Donald Trump's promise that grocery costs were going to be lowered on day one. And a lot of people believed them. I didn't make that promise. He made that promise. And he should be held accountable for his failure to deliver, not just on day one, but into the early weeks of his administration. In fact, costs aren't going down, they're going up. Inflation is going up. But there are areas where we can make a difference. Let's start with the housing market. We have a supply and demand problem in the United States of America. We don't have enough supply. There aren't enough homes and apartments being built. And so as a result, we're seeing housing prices, rent go up, not down, and a lack of availability. And housing and home ownership is like the fundamental promise of the American dream. And it allows you to pass that home down to the next generation. And a lot of people are shut out of the housing market because of interest rates being incredibly high, but also as a result of the fact that there just aren't enough homes. And the Congress, the president, the administration, we can act in this space to actually create the public-private partnerships necessary to build more affordable homes all across America. And we should be doing that. But we haven't seen a single executive action, a single step by this administration, a single bill introduced by House Republicans to actually address the housing crisis. And Katie, on this point, we know that housing is the number one cost that everyday Americans confront. It's going to be your greatest expense. So it's where we can make the greatest difference. And our Republican colleagues, unfortunately, have been missing in action.
It's hard to believe President Trump has only been in office for about 6 weeks. Let's talk about this frenetic time. He has tightened immigration controls by deploying troops to the border, cutting U.S. foreign aid, most recently to Ukraine, dismantling USAID, imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico, getting rid of hundreds, if not thousands, of government jobs. He signed 75 executive orders, triggering nearly 100 lawsuits. The sheer volume has overwhelmed opponents and forced courts to work overtime to keep up. How would you describe the last 6 weeks?
Been a parade of horribles that Donald Trump and the administration are unleashing on the American people. And it does require an all hands on deck effort. We have to aggressively push back in defense of the American people, in the Congress, in the courts, and in communities all across the United States of America. We're starting to see that happen in significant ways. Last week, every single Democrat was united in voting against what we view as a reckless and irresponsible Republican budget that would set in motion the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. This is not a joke, folks. This is serious. This is a matter of life and death. And in the Congress, we're going to continue to do everything that we can to protect the health care of the American people. In the courts, as you indicated, Katie, we've seen, as a result of the flood of executive orders and administrative actions, a response that meets the moment. More than 100 different lawsuits have been filed against these unconstitutional and unlawful executive actions. And Donald Trump and the Republicans aren't winning in court. They are losing in court in case after case after case.
I want to talk about the
Yes.
budget and the courts more in a moment, but do you think flooding the zone, as Steve Bannon calls it, is part of the strategy to overwhelm your party and create almost paralysis?
I think that certainly is the strategy. The strategy is to try to disorient the American people by flooding the zone and create the appearance that it's all inevitable, that Donald Trump, the Trump administration is insurmountable. But here's the thing, Katie, the facts suggest otherwise. One of the things that we are aggressively engaged in doing is winning the public argument. And Donald Trump's public approval ratings aren't going up. They aren't staying the same. They are coming down.
According to the latest PBS News NPR Marist poll, more than half of Americans believe the State of the Union is not strong and the country is headed in the wrong direction. That's not good news, but it's better than it was under Joe Biden. In December of last year, 64% of respondents said the country was headed in the wrong direction. How do you make sense of this, that there's a sizable number of Americans who believe what we're seeing is an improvement?
Well, actually, I mean, I think if you look at where we were at on January 20th and where we are at now, because it's only one president at a time, and Donald Trump is now the president, the American people have consistently indicated that the country is moving in the wrong direction, that the administration is not focused on solving the challenges that matter, most particularly driving down the high cost of living and improving the economy. And in part, I think everyday Americans are coming to that conclusion because every day there's some new drama, there's some more chaos, there's extremism unleashed on the American people. And the American people are smart enough to understand, what does any of this foolishness have to do with making my life better, and have come to the conclusion increasingly that none of it does. In fact, the bills that they actually are moving forward would make life worse for everyday Americans, particularly as it relates to taking away Medicaid or Social Security benefits or Medicare or SNAP or veterans benefits, all of which we're going to continue to fight for. These are earned benefits that the American people deserve. They've worked hard for, and we're going to make sure they remain in place.
Someone texted me this morning, a friend of mine, and said, "What do these tariffs mean for me?" What impact will these tariffs have on the American people in your view?
I think the tariffs, because they have been done in such a ham-handed fashion, are going to make costs higher, not lower. And independent economists, whether they're from the right, the center, or the left, have all come to that conclusion, which is why the Wall Street Journal, no bastion of liberalism, Katie, as we know, has said Donald Trump and his trade war is going to make life more expensive for the American people. That's the Wall Street Journal. And so our perspective on this is, instead of launching trade wars against our allies in North America, we should be working together with our allies to lift up the quality of life for everyone, as opposed to actually what we see happening, which is, while going to war against our allies in terms of trade and tariffs, Donald Trump consistently seems to be playing footsie with our enemies, like Vladimir Putin, who's a brutal dictator and a sworn enemy of the United States of America. And people to other country, as I travel the country, have said to me, make it all make sense.
Why do you think his coziness with Vladimir Putin and his disdain for President Zelensky hasn't raised more red flags throughout the country? Because it seems to me that it is not upsetting people as much as perhaps it should.
Yeah, I think people remain understandably and primarily concerned with some core issues: putting food on the table, paying the rent, clothing on the backs of their children. They want to see an improved economy. We have to secure the border. We understand that. It's critical for that to occur. We have a broken immigration system, and we need to fix it. We believe we should fix it in a comprehensive and a bipartisan way, and at the same time, stand up for dreamers and farm workers and law-abiding immigrant families, all of whom contribute to our country and our country's success and prosperity. And people want to see safe communities. Now, I do believe that the overwhelming majority of Americans also understand that America's leadership of the free world brings about peace and prosperity for us, and that we should not yield that position to Vladimir Putin, to Russia, to China, to North Korea, to Iran. We need to maintain that position, lift up values of freedom and truth and democracy, values that presidents from John F. Kennedy to Ronald Reagan have all articulated as quintessential to American exceptionalism. And it is shocking to many of us on the Hill that Donald Trump is walking away from those values in such rapid fashion, and he's jeopardizing America's national security as a result.
What do you think of his call to end U.S. aid to Ukraine?
He's indicated it's a pause. That funding needs to be reinstated, and it needs to be reinstated immediately, because Ukraine is not our enemy. They are our friend. And yes, their territorial sovereignty is important. Russia is the aggressor. Russia,
Even though he says Russia, Ukraine started the war.
his own colleagues in the Republican Party have strongly disagreed with him, because the facts are the facts are the facts. We know Russia violated a ceasefire. Russia brutally attacked Ukraine. Russia has kidnapped thousands of Ukrainian children, ripped them away from their families and their communities. This is inhumane stuff.
How can he just flat out lie about it, in your view, and get away with it?
I've long since concluded, unfortunately, that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, led by the current president, have adopted an approach where facts don't matter. Hypocrisy is not a constraint to their behavior. They will say one thing and do another. And some of them have actually concluded as a strategy that shamelessness is a superpower. And so we're just going to have to dig deep in how we communicate to the American people and reach them where they are about all of the issues that matter, including American leadership in the world, because that does relate directly to American success, prosperity, and national security at home.
Let's move on to immigration. According to a recent Pew survey, 59% of US adults support increasing deportations. 58% support the growing presence or growing the military's presence at the southern border. I think there's conventional wisdom, Hakeem, that the Democrats have really botched the whole immigration issue. Do you think that criticism is valid? And what do you think of so much support for some of these Trump policies that have now been enacted?
We definitely have to do a better job as Democrats of making clear that if you're a violent felon, if you threaten the safety of any community, anywhere in the United States of America, you should be deported. But at the same period of time, we should also make sure that we are looking out for law-abiding immigrant families and for dreamers and for farm workers, all of whom are contributing to our success as a country. And the American people support that as well. And I think one of the challenges that we confront right now is that the Trump administration is overreaching relative to their approach to immigration. We all support securing the border. We need a strong and a safe and a secure border. And that is not a partisan issue. But the execution of immigration enforcement has to be done in a sensible manner. And that should involve focusing on the violent felons who are threatening our communities, while at the same time keeping law-abiding immigrant families together.
I think the Trump administration has defined criminals as anyone who has entered this country illegally and not someone who actually is or has committed criminal acts. Is that part of the problem? It's such a broad definition.
I think that sensible Republicans here in the Congress, to the extent that some still exist, and they do, will say privately that, yes, we do have a broken immigration system. We have to create a earned pathway towards citizenship for those farm workers or dreamers or others who are actually contributing in a meaningful way to our country and to our economy and to communities all across the country. And part of the challenge with respect to the immigration debate is that there's been no room to actually have that kind of comprehensive discussion that will result in a bipartisan outcome that's good for the American people. And we certainly hope to get to that place. We're not in that moment right now because the administration has just unleashed xenophobic activity in ways that are actually resulting back home in New York City, legal permanent residents, or in some cases, American citizens who are of Latino backgrounds being stopped and detained by ICE agents. I met with a family just last week, a citizen from the Dominican Republic, whose brother-in-law is a police officer protecting and serving our communities in New York, raising his children in central Brooklyn, stopped and detained by ICE, even after showing proof of citizenship in the United States of America. And he and his entire family, including their teenage children, are traumatized by it. That's not America. That can't be who we are. And so We just want some common sense execution as it relates to enforcement. And ultimately, we do need to get to a comprehensive solution to fix a broken immigration system.
Let me ask you a little bit more about Medicaid because Republicans have proposed major spending cuts to Medicaid and other social programs so they can use it to finance tax cuts, fund border security, and other measures. Can you illuminate for us, Leader Jeffries, about the impact of these cuts and what they will mean to many people in this country?
Yeah, this, is an incredibly important issue. And thank you so much, Katie, for asking the question, because the proposed Republican budget will enact the largest cut to Medicaid in American history, up to, if not beyond, $880 billion. And here's what that means. Children will be devastated. Families will be devastated. People with disabilities will be devastated. Older Americans in nursing homes or who require long-term care will be devastated, and hospitals will close in urban America, in rural America, in the heartland of America, and all across the country. That's the reality of these proposed cuts. There'll also be, if the Republican budget were to make it through, cuts to veterans benefits, cuts to nutritional assistance for children and families, cuts to public education. This is devastating stuff. And it's all being done in service of trying to achieve massive tax cuts for billionaire donors to the Republican Party and very well-connected corporations. And the American people, when that is brought to their attention, reject it. Trump voters reject it. And we should be focused on making life better for everyday Americans. It's not that complicated in terms of what should be happening here in Washington, D.C. That's what we believe as Democrats should be the North Star. Listen, in America, here's the thing. When you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself, for your family, purchase a home, educate your children, have access to high quality health care, go on vacation with your family and friends every now and then, and of course, one day retire with grace and dignity, meaning Social Security is there for you, Medicare is there for you, Medicaid is there for you. That's the quintessential American dream. And it's slipping away from far too many people. And as Democrats, we're determined to revive it. And if we can find some partners on the other side of the aisle to do just that.
Many of these cuts, according to Republican talking points, they're waste and abuse. Social Security checks are going out to 200-year-old people. And that trimming these things is positive, not negative. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what is waste and abuse and what are cuts that will, as you say, be devastating for many American families. Can you connect the dots for people?
Yes, we believe that in any institution, whether that's in the government, in the not-for-profit sector, in the private sector, that one can find waste or fraud or abuse. And to the extent that there are legitimate efforts to do that, we're supportive of making sure we have a federal government that is effective and efficient and equitable. We're all in on that. But that's not what's happening right now. I mean, the effort to slash and burn the Social Security Administration, which administers Social Security benefits, has nothing to do with waste, fraud, and abuse. Many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle ideologically have had a problem with Social Security since it was set into motion by FDR. And they have the same problem with Medicare and Medicaid. Now, here's the thing. The average Social Security benefit is $65 a day. That's what people are living on in many parts of the country, of every race, from every region, and every religion. $65 a day. Elon Musk and his federal government contracts are worth $8 million a day. If you were really interested in trying to identify waste, fraud, and abuse, start there. But hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts in different areas totaling billions of dollars that are lining the pockets of Elon Musk, none of that is under inspection. All of that, in fact, Katie, is off limits. So this is not a serious effort. And going after Medicaid, which is widely viewed by nonpartisan experts as one of the leanest federal government programs, because largely it's grants to the states who then administer the healthcare being provided to the American people, is certainly not the place to start. They can't find $880 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. Those are benefit cuts that will hurt the American people.
We'll talk more about Elon Musk in a moment. Let's focus on March 14th. Why is that such an important date for Democrats, and what do you hope will be achieved?
Well, on March 14th, funding for the federal government expires and has to be renewed. Led by Rosa DeLauro, who's the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, we're at the table having a discussion with our counterparts to try to see if we can come to a resolution that meets the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, our national security, and our economic well-being. And it's not clear to me that our Republican colleagues are operating in good faith. In fact, Elon Musk has already begun the process of trying to shut down various departments and agencies in ways that will hurt the American people. And we're concerned that Republicans who now control the House, the Senate, and the presidency are actually determined to shut the government down, to make some ideological point, as they've done in the past, or to force us as Democrats to go along with their dramatic cuts to Medicaid, to veterans benefits, and to nutritional assistance. Here's the thing, Katie. We're never going to surrender on those issues. We're going to stand on the side of the American people, just like we did unanimously last week. And once we get through the joint address to Congress, we will immediately turn to working on this issue of funding the government, but it has to be done in a manner that meets the needs of the American people.
Which sounds great, but you all just don't have the votes. I mean, you just said it. They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So the best laid plans of mice and men. I mean, what can you actually do?
It's a great question. And here's the thing. Republicans now have the narrowest majority of any party since the Great Depression. 218 Republicans, 215 Democrats. To move anything in the House, it takes 218 votes. Basically, what that means is that on any given issue, we only need 3 Republicans. Only 3, not all 218.
It's hard to muster 3 when it comes to confirmations, all kinds of things that have happened in the last 6 weeks. I mean, easier said than done. You only need 3, but those 3 don't seem very flexible.
Which is why we just have to continue to stay on it, to show up, to stand up, and to speak up for what we know is right. And we're seeing the American people do that all across the country. Here's what I would point out, and here's why we can never give up and never surrender. When Donald Trump came into office in 2017, his top political priority in terms of what he wanted to accomplish legislatively was to repeal the Affordable Care Act. The Republicans at that time had 241 members of the House on the Republican side. There were only 194 Democrats. A very different situation than what we confront right now. And Katie, you are correct. It's going to be hard to find three, but finding three is a lot different than finding 24 that was necessary in order to stop them from repealing the Affordable Care Act. But the American people in 2017, aided by a handful of Republicans led by John McCain and a unified Democratic caucus in both the House and the Senate, stood firm, and we actually stopped them from their main political project, which was to strip healthcare away from more than 100 million Americans and repeal the Affordable Care Act. If we stopped them then, with much tougher odds, I certainly believe we can stop them this time around.
Do you think the anger of their constituents in many Republican districts and states will override their loyalty to the president at some point? We saw that happening at some town halls very recently. When do you think that tipping point is going to take place, if it does take place?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, there are going to be a handful of Republicans who will conclude that we can either stand on the side of the American people, our constituents, or stand on the side of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and far-right extremism. And if we continue to blindly follow that extremism, they're going to fall next November, and they're going to lose their elections, just like 40 or so lost in 2018 because the American people had enough.
Is that what you're secretly hoping for?
Well, listen, we have to do two things, I believe. We have to stop bad things from happening in defense of the American people, stand up for everyday Americans, and we have to do that every day, every week, every month, this year, next year, until we get to November. And in November, the reality is the American people want to see checks and balances institutionally in terms of looking out for their interests. The only way to bring that about is for Democrats to take back control of the House of Representatives next year. And we certainly are going to do everything that we need to do to accomplish that on behalf of the American people.
Let me spend the rest of our time talking about the Democratic Party. Quinnipiac poll shows Democratic approval in Congress at a historic low, only 21% of voters approving. Republican approval has reached a record high of 40%. Wow. How do you make sense of those numbers? Do you think the polling is lagging? Do you think we're going to see those poll numbers changing? And this must be some serious cause for concern for you.
Well, I certainly think that we're going to continue to see those public sentiments change. When you look at that particular poll, the reason why Republicans in Congress are at 40% are not because of Democrats or swing voters or independents. It's because the Republican base has basically concluded, we like the fact that you are just following Donald Trump's orders. And by the way, the orders that are being given to you by Elon Musk. That's the reality. Republican voters like what they're seeing in terms of just facilitating every single thing that Donald Trump is doing, even when it's extreme and hurting the American people, not uttering a word of criticism. But what is interesting is that there have also been a series of polls, we're talking about polling at this point, that when you ask the American people, would you prefer Democrats in charge of the House to serve as a check and balance, or Republicans to continue to blindly support the Trump agenda, that in poll after poll after poll, the American people have actually said, we want House Democrats in charge. In fact, the Washington Post just released a poll about a week or so ago that had the Democrats in the so-called generic ballot. Who would you prefer, a Democrat in control of the House or a Republican? Had us up by 13 points. This is a Washington Post poll that just came out. The American people want us to fight, push back against the extremism, and serve as a check and balance in the Congress. That was the highest generic ballot number that we as Democrats have had in the House since October of 2018. And we know what happened in November of 2018. We won 40 seats. It's a snapshot in time, all of these polls. The reality is, listen, the American people are understandably concerned, frustrated, angry, pissed off at what they're seeing, and are demanding that all of us do more. And we have to rise to the occasion.
How you do that is
Yeah.
how you do that. How you do that is the real question.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of debate, and you're right. There has been a lot of consternation to the tune of what the hell are the Democrats doing? Why aren't they doing more? Why aren't they saying more? Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi has urged Democrats to stay united, saying, quote, any demonstration of disagreement, whether it's visual or whatever, is not a good thing. That the Dems should basically let Donald Trump stew in his own juice. Democratic strategist James Carville said the same thing, telling Democrats to do nothing and allow, quote, Republicans to crumble beneath their own weight. What do you think of that advice? Because a lot of people are pulling their hair out and saying, why aren't the Democrats doing more? Why aren't they fighting harder? Why aren't they yelling louder?
Well, we're going to continue to fight as hard as we can because that is what the moment demands. And I think we have to stop the extreme Trump agenda legislatively. Right now, the battle is around the budget and the effort to enact the largest Medicaid cut in American history. Every single Democrat was united last week. In fact, we had Brittany Pedersen, who is a young mom, had just given birth, flew across the country from Colorado with her newborn baby in order to cast a no vote and stand with us in a unified way against the reckless Republican budget. Kevin Mullen, who's battling knee surgeries and an infection that resulted, literally left the hospital, got on a plane, flew across the country. His wife joined him. Why? Because she needed to change his IV on the plane. And he made it and voted no, just like the rest of us, and wanted to be there in defense of the American people. We're going to continue to do that. And we know it's going to take intensity, it's going to take discipline, and it's going to take unity. And this is not a one-day project or a one-week project or a one-month project. It's an ongoing project. And we're going to be there for the American people. And we are going to get through this and win for the American people.
Do you think the Democratic Party has become too progressive, as a lot of people have said? I know you're a moderate. What's your take on that?
I think it's important for us to be the party of common sense solutions and
That's what
getting
Donald Trump
done.
says. He's the common sense president. It's
He
very
claims to be.
confusing.
Well, we all know, Katie, when Donald Trump says one thing, he means the opposite. And so I actually take it as a compliment that he's acknowledging that we as Democrats are actually the common sense party, which is why he's trying to take the frame, from us. And we just have to solve problems for the American people while pushing back against the extremism with every single thing that we have to meet.
I don't
this
mean
moment.
beat a dead horse, or in this case, beat a dead donkey, maybe. But I mean, how are you going to do that? How fractured is the party? It seems like everybody has an opinion about how you respond. And some have criticized your leadership and saying, you're not aggressive enough. This kinder, gentler approach is not what this moment calls for. We need more of a firebrand, they say.
Yeah, criticism comes with the territory, but and that is what it is. And listen, I'm from Brooklyn. And so we have active, fierce debates, and that's just the reality of the situation. When you're in the arena, you got to be in the arena. But what is clear is we have to bring everyone together because we all have a common objective. And again, I think, the question is, are Democrats standing up for the American people in terms of the legislative battle? Certainly we are. That's what last week proved around the budget. That's what the continued budget battle will show. Are we winning in court or are we losing in court? We're winning in court, including in the first Supreme Court case to reach that body. 7 justices voted with the American people. Only 2 voted with the Trump administration, Thomas and Alito. No surprise there. They're never going to do the right thing for the American people. 7 did. And in court after court after court, we're winning. And as it relates to these public arguments, again, Donald Trump's public approval ratings are going in the wrong direction. That will weaken his ability to jam his agenda down the throats of the American people. And we're just going to have to keep it up. As you pointed out, Katie, we're not even halfway through the first 100 days. And it feels like much longer than that, but we have to lean in and draw upon the spirit and the inspiration of the greats like John Lewis and others who we served with here in the Congress to get America through this moment and come out stronger on the other side.
Do you think in some ways it'll be too late? Heather Cox Richardson, who I interviewed, and Lawrence Tribe, who I'm sure you know, Hakeem, basically said by the time the courts step in, so many institutions and organizations and agencies, et cetera, will be dismantled. How are you going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, essentially? The damage will have been done.
Well, one of the things that will be important is to block them as much as we can legislatively, because these administrative actions, one, of course, they're being stopped, halted temporarily in the courts. That's an ongoing struggle. But Donald Trump and the Republicans haven't been able to pass a single bill that actually cements the Project 2025 agenda. Not one. Because of strong opposition in defense of the American people that's coming from the Democratic side. Not a single bill to permanently change the landscape of America. And we're going to have to maintain that significant and enlightened opposition in order to prevent things that they're trying to do from ever being signed into law. But the reality is, unlike what has happened under other presidencies, where whether it's a Democratic president or Republican president, they've moved quickly in the first 100 days to get laws passed because they know that that's the only way to permanently change things. This president has been unable to do so. In fact, he has said to Republicans, give me some legislative wins. We don't have any.
But he's kind of bypassing Congress to do all this stuff. It's like he doesn't need Congress. And if Congress has the power of the purse, I don't know. It's just he's leapfrogging over you guys, basically.
He's trying to, which is why he's been sued over 100 different times. And he's losing in court. We have to hold the line. And we've got great lawyers in the Congress like Jamie Raskin and Joe Neguse and others, Jasmine Crockett, who are all working on these issues in connection to our Rapid Response Task Force and Litigation Working Group. And I've charged them all. Make sure we're prepared for any eventuality on the legal side, any eventuality.
I'm curious to get your reaction to J.D. Vance, who criticized the judiciary, basically asserting that judges don't have authority over Trump's executive power. There's a whole term for this. You probably know what it is, but it's basically redefining, right, the executive authority in this country. And in a 2021 podcast, Vance even suggested that if courts attempted to block executive actions, the president should emulate Andrew Jackson's defiance, stating, quote, "The Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it." So how concerned are you that the Trump administration will essentially ignore the judiciary branch of the federal government and continue doing what they want to do.
Yeah, JD Vance talks a big game, but I don't think he is ever going to live up to the rhetoric that he's suggesting be brought about. We haven't seen that defiance. We're prepared for it, but we haven't seen it. And let me just, make it clear. My faith is in the goodness and strength and resilience of the American people first and foremost. And that has to manifest itself in the Congress, in the courts, and in the community. But this is all being driven by the faith that we have in the American people to always rise to the occasion to make sure that we can bring about a country that is the best version of herself. That's what we have to do here. And some of those battles will be in the Congress, some of those battles will be in the court. We got to make sure in community after community throughout the nation that the American people understand the stakes and the role that they can play in helping to bring about the best possible outcome. And that's during these first 100 days, during the first year, into next year, through November, and making sure that we do what we have to do on the non-governmental side to take back control of the House of Representatives so we can largely end this national nightmare of complete Republican control of government.
This has been so helpful and enlightening, but it seems like the Democrats have a messaging problem. I do most of these interviews on social media platforms, and we solicit questions. And I just want to give you a sense of what people are feeling out there by telling you some of these questions that people wanted me to ask you.
Yeah.
But what are the Democrats doing to counteract the attack on our democracy? Why are the Democrats being so silent? It's disheartening. Where are the Democratic leaders? We need a drastic change to the Democratic Party moving forward. What do you propose? Why aren't Democrats being more aggressive and unified in speaking out against Trump and Elon Musk? Why aren't Democrats sharing a cohesive plan with supporters this far into Trump's terms? What are the Democrats' plan to counter another 4 years of the Trump administration and Project 2025? You get my drift, Hakeem. This is what people want to know. So clearly, there is a disconnect in what you all are doing to fight everything that's going on and what the people in this country feel and know and understand what you are doing. How are you going to bridge that divide? Because honestly, we got so many questions like these.
Every time I travel the country, and I'm all across the country, I run into everyday Americans, of course, who express similar concerns. Many, of course, talk to me about healthcare, about the economy, about housing, about, how they can make ends meet. And that remains the predominant issue. There are many, of course, who are otherwise concerned about the attack on the American way of life, the attack on our democracy. One of the things I think is very important to understand, it's called the bully pulpit for a reason. And this is a bully who's occupying it right now, who spends all of his time trying to communicate often disinformation to the American people. And the media is at his beck and call. And that is what is creating a lot of frustration, understandably, to the American people. Every president has the ability to wield the bully pulpit in a dominant way. This president spends all of his time doing it. And so it's going to require, I think, the power of amplification. And I've urged everyone, starting with the districts that we represent and then building up from there, because there are 215 of us all across the country on the ground, holding town hall meetings or events or days of action or telephone town hall meetings where we've gotten explosive participation, thousands of people joining us each and every time we hold them. And we've got to sustain that intensity because it will continue to build upon itself without the ability of any one individual at this moment in time to have the bully pulpit that Donald Trump has. But
But
because
can you
he
all speak, can you all get together and speak with more, with one voice? It just sounds like your message is being diluted. I agree with you. You're not being covered, and has commandeered the airwaves, right, in many ways. But it just seems like there isn't a strong enough counterattack, that maybe if you all had a message of the day and all got together and flooded your own zone with some kind of counter messaging, that would be more effective. I just think you need a better communications and PR strategy, if you don't mind my saying.
I
So
appreciate, listen, no more person expert in this area than you, which is one of the reasons why I'm on this particular platform, because we have to flood the zone all day, every day, and of course, do it together with simplicity and repetition. And that does require the House Democrats, the Senate Democrats, the governors, our mayors, our local elected officials, our activists, our community members, concerned citizens. It requires everyone to share their story, amplify our perspectives and their concerns. It is all hands on deck. And I think that we're going to have to just sustain a level of intensity and rise to the occasion to meet the moment, because it's unlike any other moment that we've seen in modern American history. And of course, new approaches to reaching the American people are going to be important. We saw that as one clear lesson in the aftermath of the 2024 results, that we've got to meet the American people where they are, on the ground, in the streets, in the community, in the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, the barbershops, the beauty salons, the campuses, the construction work sites,
on this,
and of course, on the phone, which is why we have launched a historic partnership with social media influencers and digital platforms in connection with the joint address to Congress and in connection with our ongoing efforts to reach the American people, meeting them where they are. And again, I think from the standpoint of how the American people are viewing the president, either his approval rating is going up, it's staying the same, or it's going down. And the reality is, in poll after poll after poll, it's going down. He's losing in the Congress. His agenda has been stalled. He hasn't passed a single bill into law to cement the Project 2025 agenda. And they are failing in court. And no one disagrees that those are all facts, and should at least give people hope that the aggressive and necessary pushback against the flooding the zone and the parade of horribles is actually working. Now, there's much more that needs to be done. And we certainly recognize that, because we're in it every day. I mean, this is the battle of our lifetimes in terms of preserving the American way of life as we know it. And we're all going to have to continue to reach deeply in order to make sure we can come out of this as a country, which we will, stronger and better prepared on the other side.
Hakeem Jeffries, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Katie.